Okay. Happy New Year. Today is January 1st, 2024, and we have been in the process of adopting two little girls from Liberia for 643 days as of today. And it's not supposed to take that long, but it is. And I wanted to make this New Year's resolution that I'm going to just speak for them every day on this YouTube channel. And I don't know if anyone will watch or share. If you want to follow, watch, or share, I'm going to try to categorize our journey throughout 2024. I hope that that journey includes bringing them home. But it's become a pretty dicey situation. So we have a family that we know that got a really quick approval. They finally got approved to travel to Liberia, which is a Liberia thing, which we're waiting on that now. And when they got there, they had written a lot of letters in advance to the State Department, the U.S. State Department, and expressed some concerns. And we think because of those letters and because of their military experience and their legal experience in the past when I was an attorney, that they got pushed through quicker. So they're helping us. They're helping all the families that are waiting because they got pushed through in 24 hours, what's taking other families 4 to 6 months to do. So we've all started writing letters like they did on behalf of our kids. And I'm going to read you guys Jeremy's letter on behalf of our children. There's a couple of specific names that work for the embassy and work for the Liberian Ministry of Gender that we know well. And the Ministry of Gender and Families is like the child welfare situation. They also handle women's rights, voters' rights, workman's comp type stuff, fair wages, fair work environment. So they're busy, but we're waiting on their signature first. We've heard that some of the behaviors of the U.S. State Department have intimidated that Liberian department to sign things less. So, like, we think there might be a level of intimidation there. We don't know for sure. But we've requested some things, and if you want to write your own letter to the State Department on our behalf, we would appreciate that. We have lots of contact information that you can do. You can write it to your senators or House of Representatives, congressional representatives there, and we would appreciate it. If anyone has legal experience and wants to offer that to us, we take that too. But this is the letter I want to read, and throughout this year, I'm going to try to post something on this site every day on behalf of our kids, and hopefully tell this story from a mom's perspective of waiting, but doing everything legal and everything correct and still waiting for other people to do their job. And while we wait, we are seeing laws be broken, foreign policy be violated, which as a taxpayer should frustrate you because your tax dollars should not be for not the right decision. People that are being paid by tax dollars should do their job correctly. So this is a letter that we wrote to the State Department recently, and this is to a section of government that's dedicated to international adoption. So these people are, supposedly wanting to hear from us. To whom it may concern, my family and I have been pursuing an adoption from Liberia for 2 years. Recently, the U.S. Embassy has slowed down and almost stopped all visa approvals of newly adopted children by U.S. citizens. The Liberian Ministry of Gender and Families has also slowed down their approvals of investigations. This has thought to have been done because the U.S. Embassy overly scrutinizes the Ministry of Gender and Families investigations to where they are afraid to approve and submit current investigations. And just as a pause, basically what that means is when children come into orphan care, our agency does their own investigation of their history. They don't have to, but they do. And then when the children are available for adoption, we send all of our paperwork. We get matched by our agency and by the orphanages there. And there's more than one orphanage, but there's a few main ones. And then all of that paperwork goes to the Liberian Ministry of Gender and Families, and they investigate the child's history. So our agency does it. So it gets investigated twice on our agency, but not all orphanages. So the Liberia government is responsible for investigating these kids' past, making sure that they're true orphans, making sure that they don't have any family members left. Just make sure this wasn't like a big mistake, like a kid got taken to an orphanage and someone's looking for them. It's a pretty thorough investigation. They usually go to their home village. It's pretty lengthy and takes some time, and it's written. case report is pretty, I mean, it's not like it's just a paragraph. It's usually several pages worth of information. Talks about if the parents are deceased, talks about siblings, talks about aunts and uncles, talks about, where they were born, and interviews of even local people that may have known them when they were little. And all of those things are put into that report. So when the Liberia Ministry of Gender completes that report, they then contact the agency and say, hey, we agree, we think this child is appropriate for adoption to the United States. And they look at our stuff too, so to this family. So the Liberian government has a lot of say in where their kids go. They actually ask for reports 2 years past adoption. So every 6 months for 2 years after their kids are home, the Liberian government gets a report. So they do care what happens from that standpoint. The laws state that once that happens, they notify the agency, and then the agency's lawyer goes and sets a court date. Court date happens right after the family lands. A few days after we land in Liberia, we do a Liberian adoption, and it's done. At that point, we're just waiting for the U.S. to give us permission to travel home. It's really not the U.S. government's place to reinvestigate all of this. It's been done by our agency. There are governmental entities that supervise us getting to that point. So it's not like the U.S. government hasn't had a chance to look into this already. Our home studies, all of that stuff is by licensed social workers here in the U.S. and it's government licensure. So the U.S. government really is just looking to make sure that this kid is this kid. That's it. And they look over the adoption paperwork, and keep in mind, like, Liberia's already done this. So what they can do as the U.S. Embassy can do, instead of just granting exit visas, if they think that this child is being trafficked, or they think that this is not the child on the paperwork, it's the wrong child, they can ask for reinvestigation. So they can basically ask the Liberian Ministry of Gender to start over and investigate again and ask specific questions, and even ask for DNA testing to verify the child's identity. Which... and while they're doing that, that can take months to do. So that's why families are, instead of staying for a month, they're getting into 4, 6, 7 months. We have friends that are adopting twins that they waited in country for 5 weeks, ran out of financial resources and time off from work to do that, came home, and they're still waiting. So they're coming up on 10 weeks, 9 to 10 weeks waiting for permission to bring their children home. And they had to let the kids go back to the orphanage. So the reason that we think that the Liberian Ministry of Gender and Families has slowed down on approving is because the U.S. Embassy is going to make them do it all over again anyway. So they're just waiting because they don't think that they don't want to do it over again. And they feel targeted and being accused of not doing their job when they are doing their job. So it's not like when this paperwork, first of all, our agency does their own investigation on the forefront and does everything they can to find the correct families. Secondly, the Liberian Ministry of Gender does their job. So it's really, again, not the U.S. State Department's job to ask for more investigations. If there's a lack of paperwork, maybe, and the U.S. State Department also interviews the birth family if they're available. Like, they interview the parents if there's one parent still living, or if there's an aunt or uncle or a family member that basically is the one that placed them in the orphanage. They talk to them before they grant these exit visas, which is a whole nother thing that they don't necessarily have to do, but they do. And so they interview the birth family, they look through all the paperwork, it's all lined up, and then they still say, oh, we think you need to investigate more. And they don't give reasons for that. They don't say, like, oh, you didn't do this correctly, let's do this one specific thing. They just do it. So there's not a lot of predictability there. Like, our agency doesn't know exactly what they're looking for, where they could preemptively get that information and make sure it's in the report. And honestly, if the U.S. State Department decided to require a DNA test for everyone, that's an added expense, added layer, but they could tell us that on the forefront instead of waiting until families are literally waiting to travel home and having unexpected delays. So there's that. So the U.S. Embassy overly scrutinizes the Ministry of Gender and Family investigations where they are afraid to approve and submit investigations, which that's the thing that gets us the court date to go. So I request, this is back to the letter, I request that specific inquiries for the U.S. Embassy in Liberia include the following. We have a concern that there has been a trend of tremendous delay and obstruction in the processing of I-600 education over the past year. The response from the U.S. Embassy in Liberia provided potential causes for delay, yet did not address whether there has, in fact, been an increase in delay in adjudicating I-600 applications, and therefore did not address the cause of recent delays, if any. The I-600 application is the application that you submit so that your children can have travel visas and so that you can exit Liberia. And this is something that's done like right before you come home. There are families that have had this done in 24 hours. There are families that have had this done in 5.5 months, and there is zero consistency as to why one family had 5.5 months and one had 24 hours. Except for that the one with 24 hours asked for things that are in this letter, and they were not provided with any of the information they asked for, but they were just given approval quickly. So there's concerns there. With such in mind, we ask that you please provide the number of I-600 adjudications that took 4 weeks or less from the time of the I-600 appointment from the calendar years of 2021, 2022, and 2023 thus far. Please identify the number of I-600 adjudications that took over 4 weeks, but less than 6 weeks from the time of I-600 appointment from the calendar years of 2021, 22, and 23. Please identify the number of I-600 adjudications that took over 6 weeks from the time of appointment from the calendar years of 2021, 22, and 23. Basically, what we're asking for is metrics and data that says, okay, this is how many we approved in 2021, this is how many we approved in 2022, and this is how many we approved in 2023. Because we know, because we communicate with other adoptive families and we're in this community together, and Liberia is not a big country, we know that there was a ton in 2021 and a ton in 2022, and we know that in 2023 we're looking at less than 10. So we know that there's been a drop-off. But we're asking them to provide us with that information, and they don't want to. So if a trend of delay is identified by the data provided in response to the above question, please identify the cause or suspected cause of this delay. And basically that's so that we can prepare. If there's a reason for it, great. If there's a legal reason for it, great. But if there's not, this is a violation of foreign policy. In its response, the U.S. Embassy in Liberia identified visa fraud as a cause of delay for processing time. Please identify exactly how many instances of visa fraud related to adoption out of Liberia have occurred in the last 5 years. The delayed timeline in adjudicating I-600 applications has not been an issue in years past. Only recently has the delay increased to what it is now. Adoption paperwork has not changed. The process of education has not changed. Only the staff in the U.S. Embassy in Liberia has changed. It is my understanding that there has been zero fraud related to adoption visas. Zero. So they're saying that they're taking a long time because they had a fraudulent situation, but they won't say how many. So they won't say for sure that there was even one. As addressed in correspondence with the embassy, the U.S. Embassy in Liberia's failure to process I-600s in anywhere near an efficient time manner has had devastating consequences on adoptive families and their children. The psychological cost incurred is devastating. So the I-600 education is the thing you need to come home. That's what gives you your travel visa. And that these children have to be returned to the orphanage. So they meet their new family, they bond with them for 4 or 5 weeks. They are becoming a family for all intents and purposes. And these aren't babies. These are like 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old. Our kids are 6 and 7. So like, I mean, they need to move on. They don't need to return to the orphanage, but they're having to return. Not to mention the financial cost. Before recent personnel changes overseeing adoptions within the U.S. Embassy, appointments were confirmed within 24 to 48 hours. The embassy is now scheduling only one adoptive family appointment per week every other Thursday. So we're used to do it in business hours, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and get it done in 2 days or less. Now, it's there. So if there's 3 families there, then one of them is for sure going to be stuck for 6 weeks because they're only doing this every other day. And these are not complex appointments. They're just not. These are like interviews, review of paperwork, send you out. It's not supposed to be a big deal. And the thing is they did one family in 24 hours. So we know that they can. Furthermore, adoptive families who have interacted with certain embassy personnel, and I'm not going to name this person's name here, but it is named in this letter, have reported rude comments, dismissive behavior in their dealings, and the embassy's mismanagement and poor treatment towards adoptive families is completely unacceptable, and the process was not so restricted, slow, or discourteous until recently, until the last year and a half. This is what we've seen. because there was personnel change. Before that, people were excited, and they should be excited, because if you are an orphan in Liberia and you don't get adopted, your chance of surviving to the age of 5 is low, like really low. Like at one point it was 6%. That was about 5 years ago. It's improved as their infrastructure is improved, but your chance of surviving to the age of 5 in the United States is like 94%. And your chance in Liberia 5 years ago was 6%. So I know that it's improved. If you really want that statistic, I can get it. The embassy's neglect and inattention to processing adoption cases is in fact a violation of governing regulation, specifically foreign policy. The U.S. Liberia Embassy is in violation of Foreign Affairs Manual, which states that the Bureau of Consular Affairs considers adoption cases to be the highest priority. Consular sections should provide helpful, courteous, and expeditious assistance to U.S. citizens and maintain sound visa issuance policies. All adoption cases must be treated with sensitivity and processed promptly to avoid hardship for the child or adopting parents. And it's like page 9, and it has like the actual, like, this letter actually has the actual excerpt from foreign policy from the manual. This is what it says. Let me just read that again. The Bureau of Consular Affairs considers adoption cases to be of the highest priority. Consular sections should provide helpful, courteous, and expeditious assistance to U.S. citizens and maintain sound visa issuance policies. All adoption cases must be treated with sensitivity, processed promptly to avoid hardship for the child or adopting parents. It is quite obvious that the embassy does not consider adoption cases to be of highest priority. The current embassy personnel is not helpful, does not provide expeditious assistance to U.S. citizens in any way, shape, or form, and absolutely does not treat adoption cases with sensitivity, nor are such cases processed promptly to avoid hardship for the child or adopting parents. So another thing that's happening is when these children are adopted, that actually frees up space in the orphanages for a new child to come in, and there are waiting lists for this. So when the child has to return to the orphanage, that spot is taken, so they can't take more kids in. So that's a problem. That causes and that's a separate problem. But it causes a hardship for the child because they're having to go back to the orphanage. It causes hardship for the parents because they're having to leave Liberia and they're going to have to come back. Or they're having to just stay there indefinitely, which some people have done, which is what we plan to do. So now that the Liberia Ministry of Gender and Families has seen this trend, and they keep seeing these kids get bounced back to the orphanage, they don't have a huge motivation to hurry up and sign a bunch of paperwork because it's just going to cause more conflict for them. So they're just waiting until the U.S. government can get their act together. And this Jeremy's letter goes on, I am incredibly fearful of retaliation against our adoption community, as we are very aware as a collective group of adoptive families coming together of the most recent pressures placed on the Liberian Ministry of Gender, unannounced orphanage visits, and treatment of other adoptive families. So, like, the U.S. government's just sort of trying to turn everything upside down, and like, Liberia is a young country and they're doing a really good job holding it together. And one of the main things that helps them and gives their kids hope is they don't want to bear any more kids. They don't want these kids to die. And these kids don't have another chance other than adoption. They just don't. I don't want to talk too much about my daughter's personal stories, but when I read their reports of why they came to the orphanage and what their birth family asked for and why, it struck me. Because one of the phrases was the family members have requested that the children be placed in this orphanage so they can have a future. And like, as a parent of a child we have another adoptive child that we adopted at birth in the U.S. and her birth mother is fantastic, but she didn't say a future. She said a good future, stable future, solid, safe, opportunities to, just a good, stable home. And at the time of our adoptive daughter's birth, her birth mother could not provide that at that moment, and she didn't want to take a risk. And so she didn't want her to have just a future. She knew she would have a future. She wanted her to have a great future. She wanted it to be stable, not have challenges. She didn't want to risk their family being separated. I mean, she just really wanted what was best for her. And her definition of that was, a two-parent family where she's got plenty of food, plenty of clothes, plenty of extra things to do, siblings, and can go to college if she wants to, like, no questions asked. But our Liberian birth family said a future, meaning that these children were going to die. if they couldn't come in the orphanage. And that to me is a huge point, and it's a representation of most of these children, most that are coming into these orphanage. It's not like their parents just want them to have somebody that can send them to college and two-parent home, and they can have horseback riding lessons and go to soccer camp. This is like, I want them to have food. I want them to have shelter. I don't want them to die alone of some illness because I was out looking for food. That's the reality of these children, and that is why we chose to adopt them. So that's just something to keep in mind. So treatment of adoptive families, treatment of orphanages, treatment of Liberian government personnel from the U.S. State Department has been abysmal, is the word I will use. We are reasonably alarmed at the lack of transparency and what appears to be an overclassification of information that can be available to adoptive families. So that basically we want to know why, so that we can address it on the forefront, so we don't have surprises. It's borderline abusive treatment in violation of Foreign Affairs Manual, which states the Bureau of Consular Affairs considers adoption cases to be the highest priority. Consular section should provide helpful, courteous, and expeditious assistance to U.S. citizens and maintain sound visa issuance policies. All adoption cases should be treated with sensitivity, processed promptly to avoid hardship for the child or adopting family. So that's the second time we've heard that in this letter. The embassy can provide more information while navigating the sensitivities of this information. The embassy at this point gives the appearance of non-transparent vacuum of information, holding U.S. citizens' future and the finances in their hands, and carelessly for orphaned children without families. So many red flags are raised if the embassy is unwilling to provide historical metrics to provide embassy claims about adoption visa fraud are in fact true. So if they're not true, then why are they saying that they're true? If they are true, then let's figure out what happened so that we don't have these, fraudulent issues in the past. In the future, most of these fraudulent issues are probably like, it's just the paper's not filled out correctly. But they won't tell us for sure how many. We're not asking for specific details. And then that's where they kind of can say, oh, well, it's confidential. Well, the names and faces are confidential, but the metrics are not. It's like in healthcare, we look at statistics all the time. This is not something that can just be blown away. Oh, well, we can't tell you because it's confidential. You can give us the numbers. And as U.S. citizens, and as you being in a government office that's paid by taxpayer dollars, you can't just not. You have to give it to us. These are not elected positions, by the way. These are appointed positions. So you didn't vote for these people. You voted for the people that appointed them. So you can write letters to the people that are in Congress and tell them we're underwhelmed. It is understood that any third world nation faces increased challenges with corruption, solicitation, and trafficking of various types, and checks and balances should be in place on all fronts. However, if the embassy only looks through the negative lens and does not trust U.S. adoption agencies who have decades of experience navigating international adoption and years of experience navigating Liberian adoption, they are working against the adoption community, and these actions do not reflect their claim to be pro-adoption. The recent actions of the U.S. Embassy reveal that they do not trust the U.S. adoption agencies. They do not respect or trust the Ministry of Gender and Families reports. And in the name of, quote-unquote, doing the right thing, the U.S. Embassy is, in fact, hurting children and U.S. citizens. That being said, that's true. The financial strain of international adoption on a family is steep. We've fundraised over $100,000. We've paid in $60,000. We will have to travel, who knows how many times. We're supposed to travel once for 4 weeks and come home. 4 to 6 weeks and come home max. But looking at the way the U.S. Embassy is treating other families, and looking at the way the U.S. Embassy and the State Department is allowing just a few individuals to just railroad us, we've turned to more fundraising. We have been just bitter grief about this. We love these kids. We're connected to these kids. We spent 643 days praying for them, hoping for them, and chasing their future as their birth family requested. A future. We're going to give them a great future if we can ever get to them. But a future was what they were looking at. So I want that to sink in. As U.S. citizens that may be watching this, I know it's a long video and you may not be watching it at all, but it's important that you take a stand here. It's important that you do something on behalf of these kids and on behalf of us, because I wake up every day with this just weight on my heart and this like battle that my soul fights every day of like, we're just trying to do the right thing. And not everybody chooses to adopt, and that's okay. Most people that I've met support our adoption 100% and have done things to help us. Like, I don't think I've met anyone that's been like against our adoption at all. And so I think the American people are going to have to voice this. It can't just be adoptive families because we're a small percentage. It's going to have to be you. You're going to have to write a letter. You're going to have to make a stand. You're going to have to just say that as American taxpayers, we're not going to tolerate this. This is ridiculous, and this is not what's in the best interest of these kids. And just so you know, I'm talking more about international today, but I've been in the foster care world and I've been in the domestic adoption within the U.S. as well. And there's problems there too, but not like this. This is one person causing problems, but it is a culture that's been allowed to exist in the U.S. State Department for a few years. And until, again, U.S. citizens have to write letters, you have to email your congressman, you have to share my video, even though it's 27 minutes long already. You have to buy into this. Because if we don't take care of our young, who are we? So, 643 days. January 1st, 2024. I'm going to try to post a little video every day. Just because I think it helps me to just be their mom in this way, if I can't be their mom in any other way, is to tell you what's happening so that maybe you can help me do something about it. Thank you.